Namaste, everyone. Good evening. Here we are again. Let's begin with some meditation practice. Sit comfortably. Head, neck, and trunk aligned. Feel the space your body occupies. And enter the sacred cave of space, innermost temple. Let the space within this temple become like the night sky. Feel the flow and the touch of the breath in your nostrils. Warm as you exhale. Cool as you inhale. Cleansing with the exhaling breath. Energizing with the inhaling breath. The sensation of being alive. And as you watch, let that flow become smooth and long and subtle. And as you feel your breath settle, you may also feel your body settle. Muscles beginning to surrender their vigilant tension. Feel inside the parts of your body gently and lovingly until the muscles just let go. Inside your forehead and the top of your head. And then around your eyes and eyebrows. Into your cheeks and the corners of your mouth. Corners of your jaw. And the muscles in your neck. Let them all go. From your throat center, feel out along your shoulders toward your fingertips. Through your upper arms. And through your forearms. Your hands. Your fingers. And fingertips. Let your breath flow, free and deep. And as you feel into each set part of the body, let each part become still, at peace. Relax your fingertips. Feel back into your fingers. And let your fingers go, as if they could just float away. and let your hands go. Your forearms, your upper arms, and your shoulders. Your throat center. Feel down into your chest. Relax your upper chest and upper back. The muscles between your ribs. Feel into the center of your chest. Exhaling and inhaling from this space, free and deep. Relax the center of your chest and feel down into your abdomen. Relax your navel center, your belly muscles, rising and falling with the wave of breath and prana. And feel down into your hip joints, your gluteal muscles. Relax your thighs, your calves and lower legs, your feet and your toes. Your feet and your toes. Feel all your toes. And let the space of your toes be filled with stillness, peace. Feel the whole body breathe. Feel that flow of breath and mind between your navel and your nostrils. And as you observe that flow, just listen. Let the mantra song come into your mind in whatever way it comes. Drawing your mind more and more still. Feel that flow along the bridge of your nose, between Ajna Chakra and Nasagra, where the nose bridge meets the upper lip. Mantra sound resonating in that space. Feel that flow through the left hand channel in the left nostril. Feel that flow through the right hand channel in the right nostril. Now, leave left and right. Sink between into the middle space, Madhyastha. Seed of Sushumna. Listen carefully for where the Shakti is calling you. Perhaps to an inner chamber here, or along the spinal pathway, or in a particular chakra. Just listen and let the mantra guide you. Find your mind distracted. Come back to the breath. Let your breath and your mind settle again. Now, let the mantra thought arise again out of the silence and emerge in the flow of breath and prana so that your whole mind field is full of that sound. Keeping this awareness. Let your palms come before your face and your eyes gently open into your palms, observing the outward movement of your mind. And then let your heart fill your palms with fragrant blossoms of gratitude, offered for the welfare of all beings, and with thanks to the Guru, who links us heart to heart and comes to us at each moment with every breath. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Good evening, everyone. Everyone's looking good tonight. Wonderful to see your faces, as always. I want to especially thank Sophia in Greece. She sent a long video of a talk that I did for the summer retreat that they had in Europe. Wonderful event. And I hope it has the opportunity to continue. And I listened to that video again and I thought, not so bad. So I put it up on my YouTube channel. So thank you for that, Sophia. And I'm actually hoping maybe to do a little more with that because I've received some recordings of things. So I'll see if that works out. Who knows? Maybe I can become a big influencer. We left off last week at about verse 26 in the second chapter as Shantideva was winding up his discussion of making offerings as a way of creating a sense of generosity in us and opening up our sense of self a little bit. And before we launch into the next portion of this, I wonder if there are any questions or comments that people have based on last week's class and whatever reading you may be doing. Okay. Well, as always, as those thoughts arise, feel free to unmute yourself and throw them out there. No need to make this a real formal process. As we get into verse 27, starting on page, starting on page 36, right before verse 27, Chudran introduces this section of the text by saying, from verse 27 until the end of this chapter, Shantideva presents the practice of confession, or as Trungpa Rinpoche translated it, laying aside our neurotic crimes. Whenever we do something we wish we hadn't, we give it our full compassionate attention. Rather than hiding our mistakes from ourselves and others, we forthrightly declare them. By acknowledging them to ourselves, we avoid self-deception. In certain circumstances, we may also declare them to someone else as a witness to our wise intention. Now, this is a really interesting portion of the text, and it begins to address something that was a tradition in the early Buddhist communities. In those monastic communities, the monks would gather every so often. I believe it was like maybe once a month, or possibly even more often. And they would talk about their experience of their shortcomings with each other in a form of confession. Now, for those of us raised in the Christian tradition, really careful when the Buddhists start to get into this stuff because they translate the Buddhist terminology into what seems to be equivalent Western terminology with words like sin. And sin and confession and the rest of it often carries with it this burden of shame. And I want to say over and over again as we read the text that I think it's important to sort of purge our moralistic assumptions about the meanings of those words. Not that morals are unimportant. Certainly they are very important. Moralism, this judgment that we make of others and of ourselves, is something that's not very helpful and is in a way, kind of sinful in itself. And I think the judgment that people have of themselves is particularly wounding and difficult. When I talk about shame, I actually have had some very interesting conversations with people in other cultures for whom shame is a really important emotional way of regulating social behavior. And as a psychologist, I don't think of it as in quite that way. I think of it in terms of the way that people get the idea that they are bad in their being in a way that cannot be fixed. That's my definition of the Western sense of this burden of shame that so many people carry. That burden comes to people in all kinds of different ways. Sometimes it comes just, based on the judgment that we receive from others, from our parents, from other people around us. But it also comes from incidents of abuse and neglect that people experience. Anybody who's been abused has all kinds of thoughts about themselves somehow having deserved what happened to them. And that creates a sense of flawedness in our being. Now, that's a misunderstanding of Atman, a misunderstanding of yourself. Purusha is always liberated, always wise, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta. And so I think it's really important for us in the West to try to get free of that sense of the flawedness of our nature being something that is permanent and can't be fixed. And again, this is something that I attribute to a lot of early theology in the church that comes from the thinking of St. Augustine, who originated the idea of original sin, which was an attempt to describe the unfortunate tendency of human beings to sort of fall back on getting caught in the trap of desire and aversion, of pleasure and pain, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. But what ended up happening is the promulgation of this belief that we are flawed in our essential nature, in our spirit. And that's just not true. That part is, I think, a theological error. And that interpretation, even of Augustine, I think probably was a misinterpretation of what he intended, more than likely, even though it's kind of become the way most people think about the doctrine of original sin. The contemporary theologian Matthew Fox has made a great effort to try to remedy this with his concept of original blessing. And I think that sense of original blessing is a much healthier way to understand what's at the core of our being. So when we use these words like confession and sin in the verses that follow, I want us to remain aware of the baggage of poor theology and shame that those terms often carry. So these, and even in the early Christian communities, the the process of confession was initially not a priestly office. It was not a priestly sacrament in the beginning. It was something that happened among the members of the community of what was called at the time the Way. And the Way was initially a path within Judaism. It wasn't considered a separate religion for some time until, in fact, for some time after Jesus had been gone for a while and Paul came along. When the Apostle Paul began to teach, that's where Christianity really began to become a separate religion. But initially, it was a path of understanding Judaism in a more humane, forgiving, benevolent way than it tended to be interpreted by the Pharisees, who were, pretty much over concerned with the rules and with counting everything and all that stuff that we've seen in the episodes of The Chosen, where Jesus is continually chewing them out. So it wasn't a matter of the monks meeting to sort of chew each other out about their failings. It was a matter of learning to be honest with yourself and with other people. A couple paragraphs on here, Children says, "You may ask, isn't it enough to acknowledge my regrets to myself? It does help a lot, but not enough to completely dissolve self-deception. When we express our regrets to the Buddhas or another human being, we can't kid ourselves. As an act of self-compassion and self-respect, we use a witness to expose ourselves to ourselves. Thus, instead of carrying around a burden of shame, we're free to make a fresh start. It should be a liberating thing. The benefit of laying aside our neurotic crimes, I love that phrase. I think it's perfect. Replacement for the usual baggage that we carry with the word sin. The benefit of laying aside our neurotic crimes is being able to go forward without guilt. The practice of confession is an excellent way to move beyond guilt and self-deception. It relies on the view that neurosis, while it may feel monolithic and immutable, is essentially transitory and insubstantial. It is just very strong energy that we mistakenly identify as solid and permanent me. Confessing, like making offerings and prostrations, helps us to let go of this fixed version of who we are. When we do something we wish we hadn't, we don't remain oblivious, we acknowledge it with what Tsigar Kongtrul Rinpoche calls positive sadness. There's actually a term for this in the yoga tradition. That term is paschat tapa. Tapa means burning. Paschat means after. In other words, the burning feeling that we have after we realize that we've done something against our values. Instead of condemning ourselves, Children goes on, we can connect with the open-hearted tenderness of regret. Thus, the habits of self-deception and guilt have a chance to wither away. This is the essential point in the practice of confession. It's really hard to look in the mirror. I think we can all think of times when we were hiding from ourselves, when there was something that we were doing or that we were involved with that just wasn't right, and we had all kinds of ways of explaining it to ourselves. This happens with addictions all the time. And one of the beautiful things I think about the 12-step recovery program is that it's developed a lot of very common sense wisdom about how to face yourself in those moments and how to have a community of people around you that can hear what has happened and what you've realized about yourself with a sense of understanding of what it means when people fall short. Lately, last couple times I've been talking about this in talks. I've referred to someone who called me recently from another country and who had just had a sexual liaison with which he ruined his family. His spouse was someone who absolutely would be so hurt she would be unable to tolerate what happened, and that's was the case. And they have beautiful children with each other, children that they have a very good parenting relationship with. Whatever trouble is happening between them, they manage to be good parents together, no matter what. But he'd blown it permanently. And at that moment, he said to me, "It took everything I could do to call you tonight to talk about this. I'm so ashamed. I couldn't even pick up the phone." And I said to him, "I understand you feel like the worst person on the face of the earth right now. But I also know you picked up the phone and you called me. What an act of courage. What a piece of wonderful seeing yourself in the mirror and seeing the worst possible thing you could see and being willing to open that to another person in a way that you could really fully understand it for yourself." And in that moment, this person understood that they have a sexual addiction and they really have to do something about it because this is not the first time this sort of thing has happened. And the truth of it is just undeniable at this point. As I tell that story, I'm sure many of us have a moment like that in mind that's occurred in our lives. And hopefully, we have some people around us with whom we can talk about this sort of stuff in a way that isn't just self-criticizing and self-blaming, but that is laying it all out there so that it becomes possible to make a fresh start in the process of confession. And if you can do confession in that way, then it's wonderfully healthy, however difficult it may be to get to that point. So Kongtrul Rinpoche calls this burning sensation when we look in the mirror and we see that aspect of ourselves that was not according to our values. Positive sadness. It's a nice phrase. Or in Sanskrit, paschatapa, the afterburn of recognition of transgressions, of neurotic crimes. And this phrase, neurotic crimes, I'm also very fond of because it catches what in yoga is the real problem. The real problem is you got sucked in to pleasure and avoidance again, somehow. You got sucked into giving into that stuff rather than keeping a mindful relationship to whatever it is we're talking about. And so you need to reestablish that sense of mindfulness. And if your view of yourself is completely distorted by this emotional burden of shame, it's like shame is like a funhouse mirror, completely distorts how you see yourself. And until you can see yourself accurately again, it's very difficult to make a fresh start. So this kind of interpersonal mirror is so important in the process of working with ourselves. And that's what hopefully our relationships with at least some of our family members provide, the relationships with our chosen family, relationships with other kinds of communities that we're part of. If you're, struggling with some kind of an addiction, a 12-step community of some sort can do this. It's part of what a therapist does with people, is to be in relationship with others in a way that provides that kind of interpersonal mirror in which people can see themselves accurately, even the painful parts, but without the horrible distortion of shame. So this is a start. This recognition of this in ourselves is a start towards becoming innocent. And here, too, I want to reframe our notion of what we mean by innocence, because too often in discussions of religion and spirituality, innocence is cast as naivete, of not knowing, as if, for example, children are born innocent. Children are not born innocent. They are not. They are born with a whole package of desires that they hardly understand, you know? They don't know enough to have put a name on it yet. They don't know what it is or what it's about, but it's there in them. Real innocence begins when a person becomes capable of making this transformation in themselves, of seeing a moment when you have contravened your values, seeing it clearly, so clearly that the seed of innocence is created and you have the capacity to begin to make a fresh start. So for most of us, our innocence, or you could even say in a Christianized sense, our virginity is in the future. It's not something we lost the first time we had sex. That was naivete. That was not innocence that we lost. Our innocence is ahead of us. Our innocence is the creation of that space where our heart can open to others, knowing how painful that can be. This is the sort of definition of innocence and experience that William Blake was playing with in all of his poems. He went straight at this notion of how we understand what innocence really is. Innocence is a very courageous thing. Very courageous thing. It's a decision to stay open, knowing the pain that can happen and having experienced it. So Shantideva goes on in verse 27, he says, to perfect Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in all directions where they may reside, to them who are the sovereigns of great mercy, I press my palms together, praying thus, in this and all my other lifetimes, wandering in the round without beginning, blindly I have brought forth, in quotation marks, wickedness, inciting others to commit the same. I have taken pleasure in such evil, tricked and overmastered by my ignorance. Now I see the blame of it. Let's say the responsibility for it, the accountability for it. And in my heart, O great protectors, I declare it. Again, I want to try to get the moralistic language out of there. I see myself. You know, this sort of thing happened around Swami Rama, even sort of involuntarily. I mean, I think that's part of why people often felt a lot of fear about Swami Rama. You talk to Ashutosh, for example, about what it was like to live in the ashram. He'd tell you when Swami Rama came into the room, we'd all run away. We were all afraid of him. And the fear is that his mirror was so good, so intense, you know, you would easily see yourself in that way, in that interpersonal mirror. And of course, he was more than willing to point it out under the right circumstances with the right people who had enough ego strength to take what he had to offer. So he says, Pema in her commentary goes on to say, in these verses, Shantideva introduces the traditional Tibetan practice of 4 powers of confession, 4 methods for laying aside neurotic deeds. These are 1, recognition of misdeeds with positive sadness. seeing what you've done and feeling the burning of embarrassment about having done it. Embarrassment, not shame. Two, reliance on basic wisdom. Three, remedial action. And four, the resolve to do our best to not keep making the same mistake. Now, three here is so important, this remedial action. When people are overburdened by shame, whatever happened, whatever they did feels like a flaw that is unfixable in them. It feels like there's nothing they can do. This is really dangerous. This is really dangerous. This is the point where people get suicidal or homicidal. And there's really no difference between the two things. If you're with somebody who's genuinely suicidal, they are also genuinely homicidal. That's why this whole, from the perspective of somebody who's done some emergency psychiatric outreach, I can tell you that community efforts to de-escalate mental health crises, if all you do is send mental health people in there, you're putting those people in danger. If the person is really suicidal or homicidal, anything could happen. There needs to be somebody around who can take control of the situation if it's necessary. Police still need to be there. So it's because of that self-distortion of shame that it becomes hard to know what you can do to make it better, how you can change things. And if you can gain that basic wisdom, you may not have it to begin with, but chances are it exists in the community around you. That resource can provide you with ways to begin to do something different, to figure out how you can do something different and better. And I think that's a really, really important point to make in thinking about this whole process of confession. Verse 27 presents reliance on basic wisdom in the presence of the unbiased, non-judgmental wisdom of the sovereigns of great mercy. Shantideva declares in verses 28 and 29 that he has caused harm. With honesty and trust in his basic goodness, he acknowledges that he has missed the mark. That trust in basic goodness is such an important thing. This sense of original blessing that I talked about before. It isn't just goodness. Goodness is a quality of Prakriti. And you have to go even beyond goodness to be liberated. But Purusha is always mukta, is always liberated, always purified, Shuddha, always wise and enlightened, Buddha, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta. That's your nature. That's your true nature. And so that recovering that wisdom about ourselves is so important in healing. And I'm not saying it's always easy, but very often, if you can't find the answer in your own heart, then the hearts of other people around you can help with that. A couple paragraphs down, Children says, examples of remedial action range from classical to contemporary practices. The Vietnamese master Thich Nhat Hanh, for instance, worked with an American veteran of the Vietnam War who could not shake his overwhelming guilt for having killed innocent bystanders. For him, the healing action was to return to Vietnam and spend time helping people in distress. In the same spirit, if we've killed animals in the past, perhaps now we could protect them. I have a dear friend, this being the eve of Veterans Day, who was a veteran, a fellow therapist. And my friend, at one point, when he was 18, he got sucked up in the draft. And for those of you that may not remember what the American draft was like, there was a lottery, and they would take all the birthdays in the calendar and assign a number to them, and then they would draw those numbers out of a hat. And if you were in the first, I don't know, 40 or 50 numbers, you could count on being drafted into the armed forces and sent off to Vietnam. If your number was somewhat further along, but you were still didn't know for sure whether you were going to get drafted or not, like my brother, um, he went and enlisted and he got to choose where he went. So he spent his military time in Germany. And those of us who were really fortunate, thank God my number was like 362. Uh, I can't tell you what a relief that was because I was a real hippie peacenik demonstrator in my college years. I braved some tear gas protesting that war, that awful war. When I got to know my friend Patrick, he had spent at one point he was drafted into the Marine Corps, into the hardest part of the US military. And at one point in Vietnam, he spent 30 consecutive days of firefights. I don't know if you've seen what a firefight is really like. Filmmakers are even reluctant to show the reality of it. There are a few films, Full Metal Jacket and some others recently, or Platoon was another one, that tried to get at what it was like to sort of be in that atmosphere all the time. Absolutely terrified people out of their skin. And as I got to know Patrick and we were able to talk about our mutual experience of the war, me as a protester and him as a Marine, I began to realize, even though I took great self-satisfaction in being on the right side of this issue, I was wounded by that war as bad as anybody else, as bad as anybody who was there. And at one time or another, I took an attitude towards the soldiers who were there in the war that was really violent towards them, as much of the rest of the country did at that time. It was a neurotic crime, definitely. And the process of getting to know Patrick helped me to realize the pain in me that I couldn't face about that. I'm so grateful to have had that experience. There's a wonderful book by a CIA guy who ended up being a therapist who talks about that process of the sort of cultural healing that people who thought they were separate from that war need to go through. It's a wonderful book called Healing from the War. And it was absolutely eye-opening, heart-opening for me to do that, to the point where my friend came to me one day and he said, there's this movie out called Platoon. I want to go see it, but I can't go alone. Will you please come with me? So we sat through that movie, and he had his post-traumatic reactions to it. He lost a lot of fellow soldiers. And we sat there at the end of the movie, just completely wrung out, really, as the credits rolled. And it was so interesting because as we sat there silently, digesting the experience, there were two old guys sitting behind us, older than we were, who had been in World War II. And one of those guys looked at the other one and said, ah, finally somebody gets it. Somebody finally understands what a cruelty this is to everybody, even to those of us that win, just as wounded by the war as anybody else. And in my father's generation, there was a lot of that kind of woundedness, and they didn't want to talk about it. Very few World War II veterans want to talk about what happened. My father, gave us a couple of cursory descriptions of stuff. He was a corpsman in the base hospital in Guam, the main medical facility for the Pacific theater of war. You can imagine the kinds of burns, for example, that he would have seen from those battles. He almost ended up in Iwo Jima. He was on his way to Iwo Jima in a troop carrier and he got pneumonia. So they had to send him back to Guam. And that's why I'm here. Otherwise, my father would have been killed. Most certainly.
Wow.
And he never
Yeah.
talked about that stuff. He never wrote about it. And I just, these days, as difficult as my relationship with my father was, I wish I could somehow have sat down with him and really asked him, what was it really like? In a way that would allow him to open up his heart about the experience of it. There's some passage in here, and I can't remember where it is, where Children talks about the fact that when we prepare to go to bed at night, and we go into our bedroom and take off our clothes, and when we take off our clothes by ourselves, that's easy. When another person is there, it's totally different, right? The other person changes the nature of the interaction, provides that interpersonal mirror in which we see ourselves and see ourselves somewhat differently than we do in our own self-perception. In the next paragraph here, she says, another method is the life review. At least once a year, I imagine that I'm about to die. Looking back as truthfully as I can at my entire life, I give full attention to the things I wish hadn't occurred. Recognizing these mistakes honestly, but without self-recrimination, it's so important. I try to rejoice in the innate wisdom that allows me to see so bravely. And I feel compassion for how I so frequently messed up. Then I can go forward. The future is wide open. And what I do with it is up to me. I can choose different behavior. That's the important thing about living a mindful life, is being able to choose your behavior rather than simply obeying the push that we get from the fountains of desire, from our appetites,
Mhm.
from our instincts. The fourth power, she says, resolve, comes in the last verse of this chapter, verse 65. Shantideva vows to do his best not to repeat the same mistakes and to go forward without the unnecessary baggage of guilt. Now, guilt, I think, at least as I understand it psychologically, is not so bad. Guilt is the emotion that helps us regulate the social contract. And the reason I say that is that when we feel guilty about something, we usually know exactly what we did, we know why it was out of line, and we know what we need to do to fix it. You do that, whatever it is that you need to do, and it's done, finished. And you can move on easily. So, as far as I'm concerned, guilty is okay, but shame is a real problem. These four powers, she says, of confession generate a more open-hearted relationship with the world. We can transform the regret that we're basically bad and wish we weren't into the understanding that we're basically good, in quotation marks, and don't want to keep covering that over. In other words, that we are Shuddha Buddha Mukta in our being. Now we have to fix our becoming. That's the important reason why in Sanskrit, now here comes a grammar lesson. There are two verbs for being in Sanskrit. Us, which is being, pure being, which is the basis for the term asana. The verb for I am is asti. Sohamasti. The verb for becoming is bhu. So bhu is for that process of the continual unfolding of things. So the difference, the language makes the difference there between our sense of being and our sense of becoming. And so being able to sort of to sort of take a look in the mirror of our pure being helps us to correct what we become down the road. Verse 30, whatever I have done against the triple gem, against my parents, teachers, and the rest, through force of my defilements by the faculties of body, speech, and mind, 31, all the evil I, a sinner, have committed. Again, taking all of those words in the proper context. The sin that clings to me through many evil deeds, all the frightful things I have caused to be, I openly declare to you, the teachers of the world. So he's modeling that sense of a genuinely open-hearted willingness to look deeply into his own heart and to uncover the ways in which ignorance has caused him to err, to misstep, to misbehave. She says this translation, I, a sinner, may be misleading. Yes, indeed. Buddhism stresses going beyond any fixed identity, good, bad, or in between. Basically, with the right methods for working with our minds and the willingness to use them, we all have the ability to turn anything around. Absolutely true. I mean, anything. I have done a lot of work over the years with people who've been sexually abused. And believe you me, some of the worst stories you have ever heard in your life. Oh my God. And I am even more convinced than I was at the beginning of this work that forgiveness is always the goal. Not everybody gets there.
Mm.
Not everybody can go that far. And it's important to not be judgmental when people just can't quite do it. But when it does happen, when somebody can genuinely forgive the person that abused them, it is so liberating. Oh my God, so liberating. So beautiful to see. And sometimes it can even correct the relationship within which that abuse happened and put it on the right track again. And if you can get to that point in doing that work, that is just such a neat thing to see. And unfortunately, you don't always see it. So on transition from page 39 to 40, she says, I prefer to avoid words that are culturally loaded so we don't infuse Buddhist teachings with misleading projections. Trungpa Rinpoche, for instance, translated the Tibetan word dikpa as neurotic crimes rather than sin, choosing a psychological rather than an ethical interpretation. And I think that was a really wise thing to do. Words that identify us as fundamentally marred don't seem helpful. Yeah, they're not. Without them, we're more likely to feel inspired to connect with our inherent strength and goodness, with our purity, our wisdom, our better selves, our best selves. Verse 32, before my evil has been cleansed away, it may be that my death will come to me. And so that, come what may, I might be freed, I pray you quickly grant me your protection. The wanton lord of death we can't predict. and life's tasks done or still to do, we cannot say. Stay. And whether ill or well, we cannot trust our lives, our fleeting, momentary lives. And we must pass away, forsaking all. But I, devoid of understanding, have, for sake of friend and foe alike, provoked and brought about so many evils. My enemies at length will cease to be. My friends and I myself will cease to be. And all is likewise destined for destruction. Part of the message here is do it now. Don't wait. No, you never know what's going to happen. So Children goes on here in verses 32 through 36 through 46. Shantideva introduces impermanence and death. His intention is to point out the need for self-reflection before it's too late. And further down on page 41, she is talking about verse 34. Verse 34 discusses a provocative topic. Long after our friends and foes are gone, we still carry the imprints of our positive and negative reactions. Our habitual patterns remain in place long after the objects of our attachment and aversion cease. The problem is not our friends and foes, per se. The problem is the way we relate to them or to any external circumstance. What habits are we strengthening when we get enmeshed in our attachments and aversions? How will we experience the world a month, a year, or 5 years from now? Will we be even angrier, more grasping and fearful, or will some shift have occurred? This depends entirely on the tendencies we reinforce today. What a great paragraph. Wonderful explanation of the important stuff about the theory of karma. In Swami Veda's or Swami Rama's words, you are the architect of your life and you decide your destiny. How you behave now is your future. You create your future. And Swami Veda used to ask all the time, he used to say, okay, have you planned out your next life yet? Have you got that one ready to go? What's your next life going to be like? What kind of future are you planning for yourself? And I have been talking with someone in India. It's a person who unfortunately was sexually abused by a yoga teacher who was trained in our teacher training program, I'm sorry to say. And this person, unfortunately, is also a very, very wounded person. And on top of her own personal woundedness, she witnessed her father's death in front of her in the hospital. And her father was in his 70s, so it was kind of his time. But then the next year, almost on the father's death anniversary, her brother dropped dead in front of her in their house of a cardiac arrest. This person is so completely freaked out by the notion of death. She obsesses about it every minute that she isn't talking to somebody. That's what's going in her head, is all these images fueled by some post-traumatic stress disorder of the father's face as he's dying, brother's face as he's dying, the cremation, and she's projecting that fear into the future. Oh my God, they're going to burn my body. I'm going to suffer horribly. She is just absolutely terrified of death, and I've been trying so hard to get her out of that hole, and I'm not so far I'm not doing very well with it, I have to say. We keep working on. In fact, I sent her a couple of pages of children's book this evening, because there's some passages a little further on that might be helpful. I don't know. We'll see. I hope so. Um, but that obsession with dying, what we refer to in yoga as abhinivesha, the fear of losing our dwelling, is so strong. And particularly if people have a lot of traumatic experiences that are tied with dying. That's part of the reason why in each culture you have the kind of funerary rituals that you have in order to provide a structure for facing the fact of death and then being able to come to that experience in a relatively relaxed way. And that's one of the things that's so great about yoga because we really spend our whole time preparing for that moment, preparing for the moment when it all dissolves. We learn to relax our body. We learn to relax our mind and focus it and keep our mindfulness no matter what else is happening. So that at the moment when the moment comes for us to go, even if it's sudden, we'll be able to observe that transition. We'll be able to see the process of the karmashaya for the next life arising as we leave the body and giving us a little hint about what's coming. This is in the, I forget the sutra numbers, but it's in chapter 2, the Yoga Sutras. So by dealing with our life now, by looking into ourselves and doing the work of emotional purification now, whenever that moment comes when we have to surrender our life and our body, we'll be ready. And our passing can be a relatively benign experience. It could even be joyful. It could even be sort of happy. Swami Veda, when he was talking about his anticipation for the moment of his death, said to us several times, he said, I expect to feel some fear. I expect to feel some fear. Everybody's afraid of losing their body. And I have a body like everybody else. But you know, if you listen to the people who were there, boy, it sure didn't seem like he had much fear. He recognized the fact that he wasn't going to be able to fix the cardiac problem that was coming up. And so he immediately got into his meditation posture and watched the process happen. I often tell the story when I'm talking about pain, dealing with pain and suffering, particularly suffering that has the possibility of death. I remember my friend Joan from my singing group, who turned out to have been quite an extraordinary person. I didn't even realize quite how extraordinary. And she had Parkinson's disease, which eventually became terminal. And she sent out this email to everybody at one point saying, I'm sorry I won't be able to come to a lot of our singings because my Parkinson's has become terminal. But I also learned today that I have stage 4 liver cancer and I'm not going to live long. Please don't think I'm sad, she said. Just come and sing with me. So we did. We came to her house and sang. And I wrote her back and I said, you know, there's some things about yoga and meditation that might be useful when the time comes to leave the body. I'd be happy to talk about that with you. And she said, oh, yeah, please come. So I went and we sang. And when everybody had left, we had our conversation about meditation. And she opened the conversation with a phrase that I always quote precisely. She said, Stephen, I'm so excited. I can hardly wait to die. What an adventure. You imagine coming to your death with that kind of anticipation? It was absolutely, I was gobsmacked at what a joyful sense this person had about the end of her life, which happened 5 days later. She left the body. Happy, joyful, surrounded by the people she loved. Just a beautiful story. Such a yogi, and I didn't even know it till it was practically too late. So you never know who's hiding among your friends and family. So the important thing is to do that work now, to constantly come back to what's going on now. Swami Veda, at one point, when he was in the early days of the Gurukulam at our ashram, there was a period when people were not treating themselves well. There was a lot of blame and recrimination and anger and crap going around. And it was just becoming sort of unbearable. So at one point, he just said to everybody, okay, stop the program. Everybody go into a silent retreat for the next, I can't remember, it was 3 days or 9 days or something like that. And at that point, he wrote this little prayer. And he said, okay, here's your practice. Every single time for the next several days that you notice a critical thought about yourself or another person in your mind, I want you to say this little prayer and do 11 repetitions of the Gayatri Mantra. The little prayer goes like this. And I'm happy to send a copy of this to anybody who wants it. It's really a nice practice. I won't recite the Sanskrit, but the translation of it, his translation of it is, Mother Gayatri, O Gurudev, grant me the purity of buddhi. May my mind become immaculate, quiet, peaceful, clear, and pleasant. May all my emotions be purified. Grant me the spiritual strength to ask for forgiveness with a sentiment of amity. Om Tat Sat. May all this endeavor be accepted as my surrender and offering to Brahman. And then you sit and do 11 repetitions of the Gayatri. This would be a great personal practice for a silent retreat day at home. And just see, you might even keep a journal of how many times you see your mind kind of turning in a judgmental direction. I guess I will. I will recite the Sanskrit of it just because I can't help myself. It's beautiful. Gayatri Mata. Hey Guru, Shri Guru. Sadbuddhir me prayacha. Chittam me nirmalam shantam prasannam bhuyat. Sarve me bhavaha shuddhyantam maitri bhavanaya kshamam yachintam atma balam me dehi. Om Tat Sat Brahmarpanamastu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Gayatri Mata, O Mother Gayatri. Hey Guru, Shri Guru. O Guru, beautiful and benevolent Guru. Sadbuddhir me prayacha. I pray you make my buddhi true and pure. Chittam me nirmalam. May my mind be immaculate. Shantam, peaceful. Prasannam, clarified. Bhuyat, may it become. May my mind become all of these things. Sarve me bhavaha shuddhyantam maitri bhavanaya. give me the bhavana, it's a really hard word to translate, the feeling, the contemplation of friendliness purely, to seek kshama, to seek forgiveness. Atma balam me dehi, give me the strength of self to do this. Om Tat Sat. Brahmarpanamastu, may this be an offering to Brahman. Beautiful little prayer. So I'm happy to send that to anybody. I guess what I'll do is, actually, I think Phyllis may already have a copy of it. But I'll send one anyway. And if you want to get one directly from me, my email is parkpsych, PARKPSYCH @yahoo.com. That's a good chapter for tonight, I think.
What
This
would you
was
call the name of that prayer? That
the Gayatri Prayashchitta practice is what that was actually Swami Veda's term for it.
Stoma, can you just say your email again?
Sure. Oh, let me put it in the chat box here. Parkpsych, PARKPSYCH @yahoo.com. Oh, there it is. Sujata has put it up there. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks. I was sure I had it. I just didn't hear quick enough.
There. Now it should be in the chat box. This was a lot of heavy stuff tonight. But I think it's so important that in the process of looking at what Shantideva is talking about here, that we're able to understand the process of what he's asking people to do without carrying some of the cultural baggage that we bring from our Western upbringing, that can get in the way and sort of distort our sense of ourselves and what we're doing. And if we do that whole process really well and skillfully, then at every point there's a potential for a new beginning. And eventually, as we gradually over many lifetimes perfect ourselves, that's what the experience of life becomes. As Yogananda said in his poem about samadhi, endless waves of ever new joy. A joyfulness that never gets old or familiar. Something that's breaking out anew at every moment. That gives the world and our life the freshness. Reminds me of that old Cat Stevens version of the traditional hymn, Morning is Broken. Go listen to it, it's beautiful. So, take these things into your heart, and if there are questions about it, we can address those when we meet next week. And otherwise, where's your breath? Where did that thing go? Come back to feel that flow. To let yourself go inside into the temple long enough to take your leave of that presence, to carry it with you out into the rest of your life, so that you become that truthful and benevolent, loving mirror to the people around you. And just sit in that light for the next 2 minutes. Om Tat Sat. Brahmarpanamastu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Wish you all a lovely night. And we'll see you all next week. Be well.
Thank you. There we go.